Hello everyone, welcome to our next session on the unit of labels in our course Understanding Uncertainty in Data-Driven Research. In the previous sessions we saw what are labels, we saw why they vary, and I already hinted that some of the variation in labels can actually be meaningful, can be plausible, and can be of interest. That's why we're going to talk about so-called human label variation today, which basically is the fact that labels vary, so label variation exists, because there are human aspects in labels, such as opinion, subjectivity, ambiguity, and so on. First of all, I'm going to present you some examples where we observe human label variation. For example, here in our CIFAR 10 dataset that I presented to you already, we have two images of the category deer, and we observe that even though here is a kind of clear picture, we have a deer on green grass, only 45 out of how many people is it? 51 people agree. Some people see a dog here, some people a horse. However, there are also examples where maybe the evidence in the image itself is not that clear. We cannot really see where the deer is supposed to be. We see some leaves on the ground, and we actually see that only 9 people say that this is the category deer. And also maybe like some subjectivity is in there, but also I think mainly because the image is not that clear. Another example is here satellite image classification. So we have basically many satellite images, and we want to classify what kind of buildings and build types are seen on those images. And as you can already see, oftentimes like two categories are kind of similar. For example, here, is it open middle rise or open low rise? It's kind of difficult to say. And also, for example, if we classify them into those different categories, we can see that there are always people disagreeing with each other. So for example, for this unit 5 here, we see 3 people say it's urban contact, 9 people say it's urban open. This can be because, for example, the borders or the boundaries of the different classes are a little bit fuzzy. Again, maybe the image quality is not good enough. Maybe people are just have subjective varying opinions. There are many reasons for human label variation. Next, we're going to look at an example where I think it's obvious that this human label variation does not come from just this missing information or the missing clarity of images, but from real subjectivity. Again, we're going to look at hate speech detection. If we have the sentence, the gender pay gap is not a problem of sexism, we observe that many annotators disagree whether this is a hateful example or not a hateful example. And depending on their subjective opinions, this label just varies. And just as we saw in the example of caveats of majority voting, if we just ignore that there is variation in those labels, we also might ignore minorities or see that offensiveness heavily depends also on cultural context and so on. Okay, so human label variation is when people give different reasonable labels. Then this variation might reveal uncertainty in the evidence, ambiguity in the item. So here is this classical, is it a bunny or is it a duck example? We can have fuzzy boundaries, for example, just as they were in the satellite image classification. There might be different interpretations, or maybe there is a contested social or institutional construct, for example, varying cultural definitions of what is considered offensive or not. And also this disagreement can be a signal. So there are definitely examples where we want to keep this disagreement and just assume that those disagreeing, varying labels contain some information. And in order to be able to actually keep this information, we need to change the evaluation. What changes in evaluation? Metrics that require one single label per instance are not meaningful. For example, the accuracy that just measures are you correct or incorrect with the labels, or is your training algorithm correct or incorrect, does it predict the correct class, does not make sense if there is not a single correct class. That's also the case for precision, for the area under the ROC curve, for cross entropy with hard labels. So if we use the cross entropy with just this single majority vote label, it ignores the label distribution. Metrics that work with label distributions are cross entropy with soft labels. So if we really just take the percentages, the fraction of people for each class and use cross entropy there, we actually keep those varying opinions. The Breyer score also works with that, or the JS or KL divergence, which are also label distribution aware metrics. So in general, we can say that when we observe human label variation, the core shifts from did the ground truth model did the model match the ground truth label, to did the model capture the range and uncertainty of plausible human judgments. Also, if we actually use those label distribution aware metrics, we can also see improvements in other areas. For example, in calibration. So there was a study here by Christoph Schweden and Katharina Hechinger that showed, and co-authors, that showed that when you use multiple expert judgments and collapse them into a majority vote, then train with, for example, the categorical cross-entropy, you see that the calibration actually gets worse compared to actually just training with the distributions. This is because when every class that receives annotation actually also influences your loss function, the loss function is the metric that optimizes your machine learning algorithm, it then discourages concentrated predictions and improves calibration. We are funded by the DFG and our copyright. Bye everyone.